Somewhere inside the White House press room, a reporter asked President Trump a question that sounds like it belongs in a movie script. 10 American scientists. Some vanished without a trace. Some found dead under circumstances nobody can fully explain. And the reporter wanted to know, is anyone actually connecting the dots? The president didn't laugh it off. He told reporters he'd just walked out of a meeting about exactly this. Within days, the White House confirmed, in writing, that federal agencies, including the FBI, were formally reviewing every case together, looking for a pattern. A congressional committee opened its own investigation on top of that. Before you decide what any of that means, you need to hear who these people actually were, what happened to each of them one by one, and exactly what the government has said, and hasn't said, since this story moved from a small search and rescue Facebook page all the way to the president's own desk. Because the full picture here is stranger, and more complicated than any single headline you've probably already seen. This story begins with one man walking out of his front door in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on the morning of February 27, 2026, and never coming back. His name was William Neal McCasland, 68 years old, a retired U.S. Air Force Major General who had once commanded the Air Force Research Laboratory, one of the most significant advanced technology institutions inside the entire American military. Over his career, he'd worked on programs including GPS development and the Space-Based Laser Project Office. Later in life, he'd also been briefly connected to an organization publicly known for promoting theories about UFOs. Here's exactly what investigators say he left behind that morning. No phone, no wearable devices, not even his prescription glasses. What he did take with him was a pair of hiking boots, his wallet, and a revolver. Authorities issued a silver alert almost immediately. Search and rescue teams deployed drones and K-9 units across the surrounding area. Weeks later, they recovered a gray Air Force sweatshirt, roughly a mile and a quarter from his home. Beyond that single item, there has been no other confirmed trace of him since. A disappearance like that would already be unsettling on its own, involving anyone. But McCasland turned out to be just the name that made people start looking backward at other cases. And once you actually lay that fuller list out in front of you, it becomes a lot harder to wave away as pure coincidence. These are real people, with real careers and real families left behind, and it matters to hear them by name. Monica Jacinto Reza, a 60-year-old aerospace engineer who spent her career working on rocket engines, disappeared while hiking alone in Los Angeles County in June of 2025. Volunteers still maintain a page online dedicated to finding her, filled with photos and requests for experienced hikers willing to help search the terrain. Around that same period, a retired Los Alamos National Laboratory technician named Anthony Chavez, 78 years old, also went missing. A friend of his told investigators that Chavez had reportedly been collaborating with a Los Alamos scientist on an unusual corner of quantum physics, specifically, the question of matter existing in two places simultaneously. Separately, a current Los Alamos administrative assistant named Melissa Casillas disappeared as well. Her remains were later discovered in a national forest, with a handgun found nearby. The list kept expanding from there. A government contractor named Steven Garcia, who held a top security clearance at a facility that manufactures components for nuclear weapons, was last seen leaving his home on foot, carrying a handgun, with police warning at the time that he may have posed a danger to himself. A 34-year-old scientist named Amy Eskridge had died back in 2022, a death her own father accepted plainly, telling reporters that scientists die too, just like anyone else. Other names tied to this broader list include NASA researcher Frank Mywald, Caltech astrophysicist Carl Grillmeyer, NASA-linked scientist Michael Hicks, and MIT plasma physics professor Nuno Loureiro, whose case, more than any other on this list, changes how you should be reading the whole story. Here's why. Investigators determined that Professor Loureiro was killed at his home near Boston by a former engineering classmate, a man driven, according to investigators, by personal jealousy stemming from their shared time in school 2 decades earlier. That same individual was later identified as responsible for an entirely separate mass shooting at a university. Sit with that for a second, because it's the single most important detail in this entire story. One name on this list of 10 has a fully solved case, a named individual, an established motive, and zero connection whatsoever to UAP research, classified programs, or government secrecy. It was personal. It was tragic. And it had nothing to do with the sky. That one confirmed fact is exactly why this story exists in 2 completely different versions at once right now. One version says a real, coordinated pattern is hiding in plain sight across these 10 cases. The other says grief, coincidence, and the ordinary human instinct to connect unrelated dots are doing all of the actual work here. And based on everything currently public, both versions remain genuinely on the table. In April of 2026, a Fox News correspondent asked Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt directly, in a live briefing, whether federal authorities were investigating a possible connection between 10 American scientists who had died or disappeared since 2024, all reportedly tied to classified nuclear or aerospace material. Leavitt said she would look into it. The very next day, a reporter asked President Trump the same question in person, and he confirmed he had just come from a meeting on the subject. Leavitt announced a formal White House review shortly afterward. Days later, the House Oversight Committee launched its own separate investigation, with its chairman publicly stating he found it unlikely that these deaths and disappearances were simply coincidental. And then came the statement that turned this from online speculation into an actual documented federal matter. The FBI confirmed in an official statement that it was leading the effort to look for connections among these cases, working directly alongside the Department of Energy and the Department of War. That is not internet chatter anymore. That is the FBI, the White House press office, and a sitting congressional committee, all confirming on the public record that they are formally reviewing this exact list of 10 names for a possible shared pattern. So what would a real, provable connection even look like here? One theory comes directly from inside Congress. A Republican representative raised a specific concern that foreign adversaries could view unprotected, high-value American researchers as easy targets, pointing out that these scientists typically have no security detail of any kind protecting them day to day. Notice that this is a fundamentally different theory than the one dominating social media. It isn't about alien secrecy at all, but about potential espionage or elimination targeting vulnerable individuals working in sensitive scientific fields. A separate and very different concern came from a technology entrepreneur and former White House economic advisor, who argued during a public UAP disclosure forum that the sheer improbability of this many disappearances happening under normal circumstances is itself a serious problem. One she said could unsettle public trust and complicate financial markets tied to future UAP transparency efforts. Whatever the eventual explanation turns out to be, you now have a sitting lawmaker, a former presidential economic advisor, and federal law enforcement, three entirely separate institutional voices, all willing to attach their name publicly to taking this seriously. But here is the other half of this story, and leaving it out would make this video no more honest than the worst version of this content already spreading online. A medical sociologist who has spent his career studying social hysteria and conspiracy thinking has pointed to a specific, well-documented psychological pattern at work here. The human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between events that are, statistically, entirely unrelated to one another. Once that idea takes hold online, it primes people to reinterpret ordinary tragedies, a suicide, an accident, a jealous former classmate, as evidence of something coordinated, even when investigators looking closely at each individual case find nothing connecting them at all. A political scientist who studies conspiracy theories for a living made an observation that helps explain exactly why this particular story spread so much further than most similar theories before it. Most conspiracy theories, he noted, simply die out on their own without any real evidence to sustain them. What made this one different wasn't new evidence, it was the fact that armed federal agents were willing to formally investigate it at all. And perhaps most importantly, several family members connected to people on this list have spoken publicly about the pain of watching their loved ones folded into a viral theory that they consider deeply unfair to the people who actually died or went missing. So here is exactly where the confirmed facts leave you, without exaggeration in either direction. It is documented, on the public record, that the FBI, the Department of Energy, and the White House are formally reviewing these 10 cases together as a group. It is equally documented that at least one of these 10 cases has already been fully solved, with a named individual and a motive entirely unrelated to UAP or classified research, a fact that should meaningfully lower your confidence that every name on this list belongs to the same underlying story. What remains genuinely open, right now, is whether the remaining cases share any real connection at all, and if they do, whether that connection points toward foreign interference, security failures inside America's own research institutions, simple tragic coincidence spread across a small professional community, or something investigators simply haven't identified yet. Anyone claiming total certainty in either direction, including any video covering this topic, is telling you more than the FBI itself has been willing to publicly commit to. 10 real people sit at the center of this story. Engineers, physicists, a retired general, an administrative assistant. Each one leaves behind a family now watching strangers online turn their loss into a plot twist in someone else's video. Whatever pattern investigators eventually find or fail to find, that part of the story is already true, right now, regardless of how this ends. Maybe the most useful thing this story actually teaches you has nothing to do with aliens, cover-ups, or foreign spies at all. It's how quickly ordinary grief turns into a shared narrative once it spreads far enough online, and how genuinely rare it is for the government to step in and formally check whether that narrative holds up, instead of simply letting it fade away quietly like every theory before it usually does. That part isn't in dispute, and it may be the detail worth remembering longest, whatever the FBI ultimately concludes.